Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar. We're just going to wait about a minute and then kick it off.
Do you have any good jokes for us, Lana?
Oh,
While we're
geez, now I'm
waiting,
on the spot.
you didn't think of any dad jokes while you were here, or mom jokes, or anything like that? Oh
I
man,
didn't. What have I done here?
yeah.
It's because
So,
I'm on the spot.
oh,
Or else
that's
I would have like 100. Yeah.
no, yeah. See, sorry about that. I should have prepared you a little bit more. So
Thanks. Yeah.
we could talk about the weather while we wait.
Oh, that's always a good one. Yep.
We've got we've got snow coming here in Salt Lake City, Utah. It'll be here Friday, which we need. So
we've got really unlike Vancouver, it's going to rain today. Yeah, it's really unusual.
one thing about Seattle and Vancouver, you can always count on rain. So
Yeah, our plants are really well watered.
Excellent.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Feel free to see our chat and chat box and maybe mention where you're coming in from. Always like to kick that off. It's exciting. We'll probably start any moment now.
Georgia and Carolina, nice. Oh, got some folks from the UK.
Dallas. Calgary, nice.
Canadians represent. Woo!
Yeah.
So, I like this whole comment from Dallas, Texas about the Cowboys. That's yes.
Nice. A little extra
So.
seasoning there. Awesome.
Oh, even Europe. Nice. We got Switzerland coming in.
All right.
We're covering the gamut here. I like it.
Geez, all right, let's give him some good information here. All right, on that note, I think we should get started. Thanks everybody for joining. Some more people coming in here. Welcome to Documenting the Network, critical part of any security process. Just as a little intro, I'm Alana. I work on the product team at ITGlue. So this means I work really closely with the products ITGlue and Network Glue. I get to help internally define what we can build next and help it move through the development process. And I'm also really privileged to speak with many IT professionals on how those solutions can best help this community and get us moving. A couple little housekeeping items before I run through is that this session is being recorded. So we'll send you that email with the link as soon as it's been processed. So we want to keep this fun and engaging, so feel free to keep using the chat box, share your experiences. We might ask you to raise your hand, but if you do have questions for us, please use the Q&A box instead so that we can make sure we go through that and we can even answer some things live at the end. And last thing, to help you follow along, for those of us watching live, you can enable a live transcript as well for this presentation.
I like this idea of a live transcript, Alana, because it means that I have to enunciate properly and speak very clearly so that the infamous clouds work properly. So
yeah, the pressure's on.
Yeah, exactly. So my name is JB Fowler. I am the Chief Product Officer here at Domotz. Domotz is a network monitoring and management cloud-based software as a service. And we are excited to be talking here with ITGlue today. Like Alana, I get to talk to many different customers in many different markets. And ultimately what I'm trying to do is make sure that the solution that Domotz provides really meets the needs of all of our customers in all of the different environments, especially managed service providers, integrators, whether they're commercial or enterprise IT. So I'm excited to be here, and I think that you guys are going to get a lot out of this webinar today. I believe that I get to do the introduction of what we're going to be talking about on the agenda. Is that right, Alana?
That's right. Go for it.
All right. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the network monitoring, the network management side of things. The reason we're doing that is we have a broad audience across ITGlue listeners and users, as well as Domotz users. So I'll give everybody just kind of the general concept of what it is that Domotz does, how we do it, the value proposition. Alana's then going to focus a little bit more on the network documentation side, how ITGlue works, what it does, how it does it, and talk about some of the advantages of using that, which from what I've seen in the slides, I think there's a lot of good things to talk about and a lot of back and forth that we can have. Fundamentally, though, I think we want to talk about how the two really come together to help you as a service provider. Again, whether you're dealing with small businesses or whether you're dealing with enterprise IT, how the two of us, when we come together, really help you with things like security and compliance and all sorts of different regulations that are out there. And I'll have a little bit about that. The exciting part in my mind, though, is how these two work so well together. And we'll talk about that integration, how to set it up, and ultimately what the benefits are for that. Before we get into that, let's do a live poll, though. I think on our next slide, we're going to ask a little bit about whether you guys have used network monitoring tools before. By all means, answer this poll, but I also want to hear from you in the chat, right? If you have certain tools that you use, whether it's on the network monitoring side or the documentation side, or whether you have no idea what it is you're doing with that, tell us in the chat. So we want to hear that. Alana, what's your experience with respect to network monitoring tools and documentation systems, and what have you heard from customers while we're waiting?
Yeah, I mean, I hear all sorts of things. I think everyone's got a mix going on. Maybe they have a different kind of mosaic setup, but I think everyone so far agrees that both are very important.
Yeah, no doubt. It's funny. I'm glad to see that nobody's saying not applicable on this, right? So that's a good thing. It actually looks like a lot, percentage-wise, a lot of our customers are taking advantage of network monitoring tools, which is great. Even looking at a lot of the chat, we see a host of many different versions of monitoring tools that are out there. I think while we're going to focus a little bit on the generalized network monitoring tool in that we have, right, and what Domotz does, I think you'll see how a lot of what we talk about applies to many different solutions that are out there. So let's, I think the next slide there is for you, if I remember correctly, Alana.
Yeah, I'll take this baton and I'll just move our little poll box because it likes to hang out in the front.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, I think that, again, talking with people, we can also agree that this landscape in particular, especially with networks, it can get messy pretty quickly. Whether you're an MME with multiple locations or an MSP with many clients to look after, when it comes to the networks you're responsible for, you have to be knowledgeable and you have to be organized at any given moment of what's going on. Appropriate monitoring of these networks is critical for ensuring that you're aware of everything that you need to be aware of in these networks. And then the network documentation part means that when you go to look at the information on these networks in your documentation product or whichever, the data is all there. You got your critical info, you've got how devices connect to one another, you've got a visual representation, so you can actually action your next steps. So yeah, having this monitoring and then networking allows you to, just have more peace of mind. It allows you to fix things faster. And then with that, you can focus on items that are a better use of your time, which I think we can, again, all agree is a really a thing we're trying to focus on in this industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that. In fact, when we talk about network monitoring, which is we go into the next slide, one of the critical components and one of the things we ask, what is network monitoring in general? And you touched on this, Alana, but to me, it's really about knowledge. And it's really about awareness of what's going on in these systems, right? What's going on in the networks that you're managing. But I think what's so much more important about that is the real-time aspect of it. It's one thing when you go in and you install a system, you put in your 3 switches, you put in your wireless access points, you put in the endpoints that connect to these devices. But I think what is more important than anything is making sure that you're continuously being updated and you're constantly understanding what's going on. You're continuously examining what's going on in that network and all of the systems that are deployed on that network. And of course, what's more important is that you have a system that, documents that, because when we get to the end of this presentation, we're talking about security, we're talking about compliance, what you're going to find is that is actually a must-have on this. Moving to the next slide, monitoring is one thing, but ultimately management is another important aspect of that, right? You can go in and install these things for a lot of service providers, right? And by definition, a managed service provider typically is not sitting in their customer's office 24/7 looking at the network. You need a way to understand remotely how that network that you installed is working, right? How it's configured. Are there changes going on in that network? And in my mind, you have to be proactive, right? There's a proactive nature to management as well. And again, if you can't do that in real time, then it's really not going to help you in the way that I think you need it to be done. One of the things that I liken this to is, and I'm going to age myself, I found that out already, but if for those of you that remember Ron Popeil, right, and his Showtime rotisserie, right, where you set it and forget it, you can't do that with networks anymore, right? That is not the way things work. Networks are constantly changing. There are new devices being put onto these networks all the time, whether they're IoT-based devices like Amazon Alexas or even wearable devices, right? People are bringing in their Apple Watches, their Android watches, right? Those are now getting on your networks. If you don't understand what's going on those networks at any one point in time, you can be in a world of hurt. Even when you see things like video systems that get deployed into networks, right? If a firmware update happens on one of those systems, it can actually bring down your network. I know that from experience because I've done that to my own networks, and you have to be able to manage those things proactively and be aware of what's going on. So that really fundamentally is what network monitoring and management, I think, is about. Let me talk a little bit about Domotz and what we do and how we achieve some of these things, right? Fundamentally, that middle circle there is what we do. We are a network management solution. We can diagnose systems that are on the network. We're constantly looking at things like round trip delays, latencies. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. But ultimately, what we see is that Domotz can help you with the asset management and documentation as well. This is why we're so excited to be here with ITGlue and talk about how the integrations work, because the way in which we discover devices, the way in which we classify devices work really well with documentation systems. And ultimately, it takes you over to the right-hand bubble, which is security and awareness, right? How can you make sure you have a secure network without being aware of what's on that network, without having that knowledge that we discussed? These three fundamental tenets are how we see managed service providers, MSSPs, as well as integrators using Domotz in the solutions that they're deploying today. On the next slide, I really talk about our value proposition and how we achieve this, right? And we're not going to do a live demo today, because I think a lot of people understand fundamentally what network monitoring and management is. But where we really differentiate is how we do our discovery and classification of every single device that's on the network, including the network infrastructure itself. Once you understand what's on that document, or once you understand what's on that network and you have it well documented, it's really then about the proactive monitoring and alerting, whether you're monitoring these systems for just simple online offline status, or whether you want to dive into those devices and look at things like SNMP, the sensors that are associated with specific devices. If you want to look at even the TCP services that are fundamentally running on these, this is how we start to differentiate with proactive monitoring. Another key part gets back to you as a service provider are not always on site. You need to be able to react quickly. You need to be able to securely connect into those systems and be able to manage them appropriately. And Domotz provides a channel for that. Ultimately, in our minds, it's about making you a tool that helps you be much more efficient and ultimately helps generate customer loyalty in the end. When we look at some of our capabilities, like on the next slide here, you'll see that Domotz is really about being a NOC, a network operations center, that gives you a multi-tenant view. We know that you have more than one customer. We know that you have customers with multiple sites, right? Being able to easily understand what's going on in those systems is one of the key things that we are about. We make it in a very easy to use dashboard, and it's easy to deploy. On the next slide, you'll see here that we have the ability to, as I mentioned before, right, discover all of these devices. The way in which we classify all the devices is by far best in the industry. We have a database of over 30 billion devices that we use to ensure that we have a very high success rate when it comes to classifying a MAC address by not only the manufacturer, but also the make, the model, and the type of device it is. I think that type and that classification is what makes it so powerful. We then interrogate these systems to, especially the network infrastructure, the firewalls, the routers, the managed switches, the wireless access points. ultimately to build out a topology that you can use for debugging and understanding what's going on in your clients' networks. Next slide, please. One of the cool things that Domotz does, and we do this extremely well for service providers, it really has to do around data aggregation. And when I say data aggregation, I'm really talking about looking at every single device on that network, looking at data within each of devices, whether it's through SNMP or MIBs, or whether it's through customized drivers and APIs that Domotz has. You can easily look at all this device. We can look at things over time. We can look at how things have changed over time. Ultimately, what you can do is build alerts on these things. So that way, if you have a particular variable within a system or within a device that you want to know what its status is, you can set alerts on those things and you can trigger events. And that can drive into your ticketing system. It can drive into your PSA tools. It can make adjustments to your documentation system as well. Next slide, please. One of the cool things that we've recently added within Domotz, and I think this is one of the more powerful features within Domotz, it's the fact that we now have real-time monitoring dashboards. These dashboards are completely customizable. You can add devices from across all of your systems, all of your networks that you're monitoring into a single instance. What I'm showing here on this slide is just one example where we did a search for all Cisco devices. We put general information about Cisco. We broke it down into Cisco phones. We broke it down into Meraki WAPs, right? These are the types of things that types of tables, I should say, you can build, but then you can even customize what information within these tables you're looking at, whether it's network-based information, or even if it's sensors like SNMP sensors within a system. If you wanted to look at all the printers across your network and understand the toner levels, right? Or the amount of paper that's gone through these printers, you can use SNMP in these tables to see that across all of your agents. So this, in my mind, is an extremely powerful tool here. Next slide. I think this is one of the last slides that I wanted to touch on. There may be one more, I can't remember, but ultimately we're about that real-time aspect, real-time diagnostics, real-time visibility into what systems are doing. One of the things that I think a lot of service providers really appreciate about Domotz is our ability to look at latency, look at changes within the network, do speed testing, whether that's across the LAN or across the WAN, right? These are some of the powerful capabilities that you have to make sure that the systems that you're monitoring are working properly. And ultimately, these things can feed right back into a documentation system as we are talking about today. So I don't think I have another slide. Look at that. Perfect. Yep. Alana, it's right. Up to you now.
Okay. I mean, okay. So firstly, I just want to comment on that. I work at ITGlue, so this might give it away, but this level of organization is just music to my ears. Like, it makes me really happy because this is just how, yeah, it's just how it should be, right? You should have this level of insight and this organization structure. And on that note, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Just because I know I saw some ITGlue popping up in the chat, and you know, maybe there's other ways that people are documenting, but I want to talk about the structure of documentation first, because what is network documentation? What's the documentation of your clients' network environments or locations' network environments? But in order to get the full impact of network documentation, we have to ensure we have a foundation of documentation at first, just the benefits as a whole. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because as an IT professional, the amount of data and information you need to get your job done effectively is growing every day. And so first, you need to understand the what. Usually we're pretty good at this. We have it in our remote tools, maybe in spreadsheets. It's what is going on, right? What we have. However, increasingly, we need to understand the relationship between hardware and software. And this relationship needs to be included in our documentation. But often, sometimes what's missed is the how and the why. You know, what functions is the machine responsible for? What are the steps for onboarding a new employee? How to access this device? What are the passwords to log into the device? You need to know all of this information and how it interacts with each other in order to see the impact and the actual processes and initiatives going on in this business. And a really critical purpose of structured documentation is to prevent the time wasted cross-referencing information that can be found in multiple places. So consolidating your existing information and that knowledge base into one centralized system of data that everyone can access, they can rely on at any time. Obviously, we can imagine, and I'm sure we've experienced, having to pop into so many different sources when really you're just looking for a couple fields or a couple things you need to know right now. And as I said earlier, we could probably use our time on better things.
Alana, I would point out that last slide that you had there is, we hear that all the time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the value of service providers, the value of integrators are really bringing all these different types of systems together, right? To make their solution better. But if we can find ways of integrating and bringing things, making it easier to document, making it easier to understand management of the systems that they're deploying, right? It's just so much better. So I appreciate that slide and the reasoning.
Yeah, and the average amount of tool stack we have in this industry is growing and it's large. So yeah, consolidation is key. I think we all can can empathize with that. So yeah, consolidating a central system, what does that look like? It's the core of strong documentation. You know, you find that clear structure, you bring all these elements into one single place. This nice little diagram puts it in a clear and simple way.
Yeah, that bringing it all into one place, I think, is really important. And I know we've talked in the past about having a single source of truth, right? And I think that's such a good phrase for this. And the cool thing that we're going to show with our integration at the end is how we can really make sure that it's you that's in control of what that source of truth is, and then how we synchronize the two, right? So I'm excited to show that at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Like earlier, everyone has a bit of a different mosaic in their needs and their business and the way it's set up. So, you know, we don't want to be too prescriptive in saying, hey, this should be your source of truth. You should decide. But what we can all agree on is that it should kind of be one place. All right. So yeah, just in general for that consolidation piece to wrap up, this is important because unpredictability is a lot less scary when you have all things in one place. And you'll also prevent institutional knowledge from getting lost in technicians' heads. You know, that's a thing that ITGlue has talked about for quite a couple of years now. And that inconsistency from your team with consolidated information. It also increase that team efficiency, you know, prevent repeated questions and speed up everyday tasks with this centralized system. For an internal use case, we use ITGlue as our corporate environment for internal documents and everything like that. So every time someone asks me a question for like the 5th time in a row, it's like, hey, we have an SOP for that. Like, you know exactly where to find it. And actually, if it's not up to date, how about you update it? So we have the exact same problem. It's a little different because we're a different company, but it's all the same wherever you are. And it really does save a lot of time.
I like the fact that you guys eat your own dog food. We monitor our systems
Yeah.
with Domotz as well. So
yeah, a best way to do it from a product standpoint for sure. All right, next is standardization. So we have the what, the why, the how, and we have a consolidated. Now we have to ensure on a basic level that it's standardized, you know, meaning there's an agreed upon method of creating and sustaining your documentation. This is exactly where it gets a little tricky. Like I said, in each business, you have to create that culture of documentation because it's key to maintaining efficiency. And important for this conversation, it's the foundation to take it further with automation, because automation can't be done without the standardization. So the more variety you have in the way you capture information, the less efficient it is in that the IT environment will be supported. And why? Well, it's because there's a huge learning curve every time you set up a new asset, a new business process, new operating system. Standardization just means that when you need to add something new, a new asset, new password, you know exactly what fields to capture. So obviously that learning curve is significantly reduced with how familiar the technician is or just how you've gotten it into your business. Using things like suggested standards and templates is really helpful, just as a hot tip for your standardization. Templates especially, they're designed by IT professionals for IT professionals by IT professionals because we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There's hundreds of templates for common small or medium-sized business process policies that you can add to your playbook in a couple minutes. We also encourage leveraging out-of-the-box SOP templates. You know, document things like your Active Directory in the same way every time.
By the way, when it comes to documentation, right, understanding that, I think I'm gonna talk a little bit about when it comes to network management, right, making sure that you have a process like IP addressing, right, understanding or having a consistent process of how you do static IP addressing for infrastructure devices, I think are so important, and that can actually be brought into your documentation tool and right dealing with SOPs like you're talking about.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. All right, so yeah, on to automation. Now that we kind of have that foundation, let's talk about the kind of meat of this network documentation, because you might be thinking, okay, for my disjointed documentation, the structure, standardization, like this is starting to seem like a lot of work. And you're kind of right, especially if you're doing it all manually, right? To kind of maybe you're reinventing the wheel in your own way. And that's why automations can help with that. And the reasons to consider automation is because, well, if the scalability of your business or team has crossed your mind and is a part of your long-term goals, automation can just help you meet that process faster. It reduces onboarding times significantly. And there's also the opportunity cost. You know, time spending creating, maintaining documentation could be better used on those other tasks. So how might be a good question to ask.
Yeah.
So you've determined that you'd really benefit from automation. All right, sounds good. So when you're looking for a system that houses documentation, look for ones that have structure. You need to standardize, but the flexibility of an open API is really important. If you work from a Windows environment, you can leverage PowerShell scripts to make updating this very easy. And you also want to consider tools that allow you to discover and document your networks and create relationships between those endpoints. And we'll walk through what that can look like. But quickly at ITGlue, we've built integrations with over 45 different products. So that means, you know, countless ways to get your tool stack consolidated and have documentation automatically synced into your documentation platform. So everyone has a slightly different stack, and we've always strived to be inclusive to each family integration. So if you don't have a documentation product and you're looking for one, highly recommend one that, you know, integrates with your whole family. That's an important piece.
I will say, you know, to that point, right, making sure that you are working with tools, right, even tools outside of documentation and tools outside of network monitoring and management, right, there's certainly your PSA stack, there can be ticketing systems, survey systems, right, making sure that they all integrate really well, I think is important. And I really feel like the last 2 years have been kind of the year of the integration, where we see a lot of companies focused on working together, right? Not just building out your own dedicated ecosystem, but really making sure that you're working with other tools and getting what is the best of breed from your point of view and working with all of those systems together. I think that's so important. So I'm glad to see you guys focused on integrations. We also have, you know, at Domotz, you know, we've got 500 plus integrations with not only software systems, but also hardware-based systems because of what we do. So.
Right. Yeah, definitely hardware. You know, once you pass a certain vantage point, you have to start working directly with them to get all that juicy information. So I'm glad to hear that too, because that's no small feat. All right. So yeah, just lastly on network documentation specifically before I pass it back over, it's hugely beneficial to have an auto updating network information, right? That automated updates without you doing anything, because I think we can all relate to once you document something, it's immediately out of date situation. So have that auto updating, have it embedded into your topology map, into your documentation platform. It's best served by a tool that obviously automatically scans your supported network and automatically documents everything about it. And
Yeah.
The other benefit to having a network diagram inside of your documentation is it can quickly bounce to the detailed documentation show page of any matching devices that you've pulled in and get that full rundown. You can see what interfaces ports connect to things that you've already have documented. Ideally, anything overlaid that you've pulled in can also show those connecting ports and interfaces, statuses, and anything that you can see that's connected again to that family of product is right there and built into your maps. So that's what I would say when you're looking for things to pull in. devices, network devices, different software products, and having that ideally embed auto update, maybe specific flexible assets or overlaid tags and relations to things that already pre-exist in your documentation stack.
Yep. I think to your point, before we get into the security and compliance, I think making sure that, documentation, that is really, like we said at the beginning, right? That's your truth of what's going on here. Making sure that you can easily have a tool that you can pull down processes, you can pull down information for your customers to deploy to them is good. If it's not continuously updated, right, with the latest information, you're going to run into problems when your customer all of a sudden needs to get a report, right, on how many PCs they have, where are they located, right? What's their network infrastructure look like? The other thing that I always like to push on, which I think is why I'm a strong proponent of having a pure documentation system as opposed to just using something like Excel or whatever, is when it comes to communications with your clients and your customers, being able to pull standardized reports at a moment's notice, getting the live information, right, I think is so critical, especially when it comes to quarterly business reviews and being able to speak to what you've done for them, how you're doing that, and how the system has changed over time. So I'm just a huge advocate for documentation system, as well as the automated aspect of updating those systems, which is why our integrations are so important. So that being said, security and compliance, I would like to push this out. I'd like to do a couple of things. One is push out to everybody in the chat, right? Let me know what your thoughts are on this slide, right? When we talk about security and compliance, what does that mean to you? What are you dealing with? What questions are you getting from your customers when it comes to regulations, when it comes to security? Okay, those types of things. I have no doubt in my mind that some of you are going to want to immediately go to cybersecurity and threat vulnerability analysis. What I'm actually thinking about is more on the compliance and regulation side. So feel free to use that chat. Tell me the buzzwords that you've heard lately and what it is you think you're dealing with. Meanwhile, what I want to do is let's go to the next slide. Oh, I should also mention, just so everybody knows, we do have teams standing by on both sides, right? Both on the ITGlue side as well as the Domotz side that can ask or can answer questions. So utilize that Q&A section, and then they can answer it live, but we'll also pull out some of those and get to those at the end too. So good. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that for the team. Let's go to the next slide while people are chiming in with some chats here. Right. First of all, we've actually done a whole webinar on this at Domotz with some industry experts. But while, like I said, while a lot of you are probably thinking about cybersecurity and threats when we talk about security, I actually want you thinking about regulated industries, right? I want to think about regulations that are coming on more and more, right? Often you hear about things like ISO, you hear things about CMMC, you may hear things about NIST, right? SOC 2 compliance, right? All of these regulations that are out there, these really are security processes that are being put in place, right? These are out there to help you be better at what you are doing. The one thing that I want to point out, and I have it on one of my notes here, is that whether you like it or not, these things are going to be on your doorstep very, very soon, right? If you aren't following a security process in some way, shape, or form, you're going to be in a world of hurt in the next few years. And on the next slide, there's a really good case in point here, which is in Louisiana, right? They, back in 2019, 2020, something like that, right? They ended up having to put in place, right? Their government put in place the fact that MSPs and MSSPs were going to have to follow certain processes. In some sense, this was really focused around CMMC. And in fact, CMMC, I always forget what it stands for, but Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, really built off of some of the NIST-based guidelines. But ultimately, it's about having a process by which you document, okay, a process by which you understand proactively what's going on in the networks that you're deploying and the systems that you're deploying. And of course, there's about 15,000 other things that you have to be aware of, but ultimately they break it down into particular segments, right? In my mind, this is coming, right? This is coming down the road. And if you are a service provider, or even if you are a commercial integrator, right, where you're just installing digital signage, you're installing video systems, you're installing unified communication system, or even voice over IP systems, okay, you're going to have to start to follow these at some point. The reason that I wanted to talk about this in just a few slides is because of the fact that in order to start achieving these things in a proper way, you need to be aware of at least how the processes work and how documentation and network monitoring fits into that. So if we go to the next slide here, right, I just pulled off, right, one of the simple pictures that you can go get from Google around NIST. But here you can see, right, that documentation and real-time network monitoring are a critical part of that. If you don't understand what's on the network, again, proactively, and how that is changing, then you're not going to be able to report at a moment's notice of what the system looks like. Should you be audited, or should there be some sort of issue that happens on the network? Most of the issues that are going to occur will probably be around your standard threats, right? The human aspect side of it, right? Kind of the cybersecurity things that we all go through trainings on and that we're all aware of. But you need to make sure that you have processes in place. You need to make sure that you have network infrastructure and management systems in place, that one, you can be immediately aware when these things happen. You can then document what's going on in the systems when you do make configuration changes or need to make configuration changes. And you need a tool that can help you rapidly respond and report on these things. So having ITGlue, having Domotz, right, or having a documentation system, having a network monitoring and management system in place is very critical for you guys as service providers and integrators alike. Alana, I have a question for you, right? Talking about these things, do you have a lot of conversations around, regulatory and compliance issues as it relates to documentation systems and what you need to do?
Oh, I mean, all the time. We're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, and we care a lot about our, making sure everything's all dialed in because of these exact conversations. Yeah. I like the way you put it, the kind of right at your doorstep situation is whether we like it or not. And, being prepared, secure, knowing everything is really on lockdown. For documentation specifically, I think that's why we get a little scared when we hear some people are still using things like spreadsheets and stuff like that. Yeah. I won't go too far into that, but it does, it's a spooky topic, right? So right. We're definitely eyes open on this conversation.
Yeah. I totally agree. In fact, there's a couple of chats that came in, which I agree, right? And Josh Lieberman's a great proponent for regulations and understanding these things, right? He's a smart guy, but he points out that, there's a windstorm. This is a house of cards. And I think that the service providers that are out there are going to have to start dealing with this. And we also had another question, which came in, which are these regulations US specific? The answer to that is no. Right? These are worldwide regulations. Let's put it this way, right? NIST, for instance, is certainly the National Institute of Standards and Technology, right? That is a US-based government, right? And CMMC often is thought around US, but the reality is the processes that get put in place. In fact, if we go to the next slide, right, I'll say are very similar to ISO, right? ISO is very much an international standards organization, the name, right? But these are things that the process in general is the same. Some of the things that you answer in response to questions or requirements are a little bit different. But going back to this webinar as a whole. Fundamentally, what you'll see is whether you're dealing with NIST, whether you're dealing with CMMC, whether you're dealing with ISO 27001, or even on the next slide, right, when you're dealing with whichever, like things like credit card systems, right, PCI compliance, okay, something that's a little bit outside of, you know, maybe the regulations that you deal with, but your customers are having to deal with that, right? Credit card systems are used in retail, they're used in restaurant systems. You guys very well may be building networks that have to utilize the credit card system, making sure that things are segmented properly, making sure that the network is documented, right? Making sure that there aren't vulnerabilities exposed to that are all critical parts to PCI. And I have no doubt in my mind that many of you probably also deal with healthcare providers, right? Whether it's dental or doctor's offices or hospitals in general. I know a lot of the integrators are dealing with that. And of course, y'all are familiar with HIPAA, right? And the Health Information Privacy Acts that are out there, right? These things also require that you have some sort of documentation, you have some sort of monitoring in place, and make sure that the structure itself is safe. So I wanted to make sure that in this section, while we're talking about security, while we're talking about compliance, these things are going to affect you, okay? Making sure that you have a tool for documentation, making sure that you have a tool for network monitoring, which really helps fulfill some of these requirements under all of these different processes, I think is just something you need to get started. And to Alana's point, if you're dealing with spreadsheets, if you're using Google Docs or Excel right now to figure out, you know, which laptops are assigned to who, you're really behind, and you need to, I think, really take advantage of some of these new technologies that are out there. So that being said, I think we can move on to a little bit about our integration before we get to some of the Q&A. So Alana, I took the liberty to put together some slides based on how Domotz has really implemented the integration that we have with ITGlue. If you want to go to the next slide. The one thing that I say here is if people that know me, right, they always know I like this whole 1 + 1 = 3. What I think is so cool about our integration, though, is it's really about two-way synchronization, right? 1 + 1 is about two-way synchronization. One of the cool things that I think ITGlue did over the last couple of years is they've really created a bunch of APIs that allows documentation tools or any other type of system to take advantage of two-way synchronization. I go back to what you said at the very beginning. There needs to be a source of truth in any type of customer environment. I don't feel that it's right for a particular manufacturer or a particular vendor to assume that they have the albeit source of truth, okay? So what we did when it came to the integration that our development team put in place, and it took us quite a while to do this, but in the end, we got a really awesome tool that allows you as the service provider that when you implement the integration, when you associate the ITGlue API key inside the Domotz environment, it allows you to decide which pieces of information, if I can call it that, right? The properties within the documentation tool or the properties within the device information within Domotz become the source of truth. We know, for instance, a couple things. In fact, if we go to the next slide here, I think this is the one where we show it. Well, I know we'll show it in the next one. When we link the organizations, right, we allow you to say which agents within the Domotz environment get linked to which organizations within ITGlue, okay? And then on the next slide, I think is where it shows the one that I want. Oh, darn it. No, I'm sorry, go back 2 slides, sorry. Yes, this is what I wanted. I had the chat window blocking this. So when you can see just in the graphic there, that for a source of truth, we allow you to select, right, which properties within either Domotz or in the ITGlue fields actually get synchronized. And whether that is manually synchronized or it's just updated on a continuous basis, okay? We can do that both ways. But if you need to get an immediate snapshot for documentation purposes at that time, you absolutely can do a manual update. But what ultimately you're doing is you're saying, okay, the names of these devices, right? Whatever I call it, I want to call it only that in the ITGlue world, okay? Well, Domotz can pull that directly in once we have associated that device or certain specific properties, like a MAC address. As we know, a MAC address is typically a very good field that is common between any type of, and certainly network system and documentation system. But then we also know things like certain sources of truth really need to come from the network monitoring system. So when you see status of the device, when you see the MAC address of the device or the IP address associated with that MAC address, those are things that we know just have to be fixed by the network monitoring system. And that gets updated automatically into ITGlue. But if for some reason you want to say, hey, I don't trust this one tool's information about like the make or the model, then switch it, right? You can synchronize it either way. So that all is one of some of the amazing integrations that I think we've done. The best thing that I can say for you guys to really try this is, first of all, make sure you're in these glues, but then go to help.domotz.com. Even within Domotz under our services page, you can easily get into the instructions. And frankly, from what I've seen, our team has made it super simple. We take the API key, we put that into the API key from ITGlue and put it into Domotz, and then the magic starts to just happen and it walks you through the process. So on the next slide, you can see where, again, we get to the linkage of the organizations like we talked about. And then on this slide here, it's really, oh, you can go to the next slide. Yeah. It's really about ensuring that the devices that you see on this network are properly matched with the ITGlue devices, fields, entities that are in there. So we're not going to dive into an example here because of time. Unfortunately, we had a lot of great information to pass on to you guys through here. I will say that the integration, both teams have made it just easy to do. So you'll find that when you actually implement this, that it is as easy as we thought, or as we said. That being said, I think we can move on to the next section where we get to some of the Q&A that have come in.
Yeah, quickly before that, I just want to comment on the integration as a whole. Like, it's a beautiful thing to see that level of granularity, and it's really the standard that we should have for good integrations nowadays. So, some integrations I'm sure we've experienced, and some are just actually just designed this way. But the whole like coming in and dumping of information without much structure, without much thought to how it kind of pours into wherever you're pouring it into. We're leaning away from that, right? Like it's a lot more beneficial when you can choose the flow of the direction and your granularity, because again, everyone's a mosaic, everyone has different needs. And again, some things should be coming in. Their source of truth is definitely the networking monitoring tool. And maybe your documentation, you wanna keep the name, stuff like that. So I really like seeing that granularity. I just wanted to comment on that because that is really really what we should be aiming for everything.
It's definitely a point of differentiation, I think, that we see. And we've gotten a lot of very positive comments on, and we've had, hundreds of integrators that have now, or service providers that have utilized the integration. And they're just really appreciative of the two-way synchronization and how to set that up. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so yeah, before we go into questions, which I think we've got some good ones, I just want to touch on some upcoming webinars. We like to throw this in at the end of the webinars to just kind of get you in the know of anything else that's coming up that you might be interested in. So coming up, we do have our 2021 year in review. So in this webinar, we bring you a recap of the year of 2021. That's a pretty big topic, and shed some light on some of the best, this with a topic, right? And some of the best strategies and processes that yielded positive outcomes and resulted in growth and profitability for most of the MSPs. We also touch on some incidents or events that resulted in some bad press. So that'll be a really good one. Dan Tomaszewski is awesome if you haven't heard him speak before. And then on January 27th, we're calling all IT trivia masters. Join in on the festivities with other IT professionals from around the globe. The hour will be filled with surprise special guests, relatable content, and exciting prizes, including a drone, Amazon gift cards, Samsung Galaxy watches, and more.
I need a
So,
drone. I don't know why I need
wow.
a drone, but I'm sure I
Yeah.
need one.
Can I
So
join this like under an alias with the
yeah.
like sunglasses on?
I love the fact too. I mean, I'm sure some of you saw this, right? We have this demo poll, right? I mean, if you guys are interested in getting a demo, whether it's of ITGlue or of Domotz, right? By all means, we'll reach out to you based on how you answer that. I will put in a plug. I didn't put it in a slide here, Alana, when it comes to presentations, but one of the things that I know a lot of Domotz users in particular are excited about is next week we're doing a webinar on our custom drivers interface. The cool thing about that, and this gets back to documentation, right? What you can now do within Domotz is create your own drivers. They are based on JavaScript, but it allows you to interrogate devices and then pull out or extract even more information within devices. And one of the interesting things too that we have the ability to do is be able to take action on things like push actions, push automations, right? And we can even send information into I guess I'd say automated tools, right? To help with documentation, to help with process. So I invite people to go to our website, domotz.com, and under the resources page, sign up for that webinar. So
Awesome.
good.
Yeah, thank you. Alrighty. So firstly, head over to our recording page to download our custom checklist designed from content of this session. It covers identifying, documenting, securing, and owning your networks. And you can head over to that link shown on the screen, and it's also in the chat box. Looks like we just popped it in there. Awesome. itglue.com/documenting the network.
And that handout that's there is, I think it's pretty slick, right? It gives you an overview of a lot of the things we've talked about, both from a network monitoring side and a documentation side, the things you need to be thinking about. We also added some other information when it comes to dealing with users, right? And making sure that your users are set up properly, making sure you have things like single sign-on or other sort of SAML-based services in place so that you can manage employees. So definitely download that thing, take a look at it. It's a quick, easy to read checklist of things to be thinking about. So I liked it.
Awesome. All right, then I think we should spend the last couple of minutes here just talking about some questions that we've had come in. And just general topics. So if you haven't yet, please throw your kind of last questions into the Q&A chat. But we can start off with some general questions. I might start with one that's been sitting here by Christian. You've explained, I wanted to understand, in addition to the advantages that I was talking about for documentation, what reports can you provide to the client for situations like PDF documentation. So with ITGlue, I mean, there's a few different resources. One of our most common uses are our runbooks. Those are specific, like exports are more kind of granular. They come in your like all the files, which you can export anything to do with your account. But the runbook specifically client facing. So it comes out in a nice human readable package that you can toggle all the settings for your runbooks and you can export that. But as a runbook, it's nice and it's laid out in a nice UI, and you can share those with your clients. And then we also have some specific reports tailored as well. So if you're curious about more of that, we have information online, and if you want to reach out to someone, just let us know. But we can give you the whole rundown of what you can do with that with ITGlue.
Yeah. Good. There was a question, and I have to say, I don't know the answer to this, Alana, but it's around your APIs, as well, right? The ITGlue APIs and whether they're available to the public. I mean, I know that the Domotz APIs, we make those publicly available as long as you have, a Domotz account, you can get your own API key and access those things. But how are those documented in the ITGlue world?
Yeah, so we have the same standard at ITGlue. We have an open API and tons of things you can do with that. I've seen some really creative, awesome things happen in our community with these APIs. There's companies that have played with them in certain ways, and then every single time we build something that we know would be useful in our open API, we make sure we put that in the requirements and build it out like that as well. Because yeah, lots of people leverage our API. So you need an ITGlue account, but then essentially the sky's the limit.
Yeah, we're a huge believer in the open API architecture. In fact, everything inside our user interface is completely built off of our APIs. Part of the reason we did that goes back to eating our own dog food. But we also believe that service providers and integrators alike will agree that they may have a better way of utilizing those APIs to build out customized reports, to build out interfaces that make sense for them and their customers and clients. So I totally appreciate any company that will create an open API architecture and utilize that. So we're firm believers in that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Good. I know it was funny. There was a question that did get answered, but the question was around those custom drivers that we're doing and whether we'll have a store. We'll answer that next week. In the end, we want to make sure that our custom drivers, just like we have this open API architecture, we want to build a community that can share with drivers. It'll ultimately be up to the owners or the creators of those drivers as to whether they share that and how they share it, but we're definitely looking into that. Totally off topic from our webinar today, though.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's good to give everyone the resources that they can have. On that topic, actually, I see some people, if you wanted a little bit more tactical, prescriptive information about, how to really get into this, obviously you can only have so much time every time we want to talk to everyone. So we are going to be rolling out a really cool series, a few different series with ITGlue at least, really getting into the granular. And those are going to be for, already existing users, and they're going to be really prescriptive things we've heard in the industry of, okay, this is how you get down to business and you can get more efficient with things, and you can use templates and tips and all that good stuff. So we have to cover a spectrum of things, but yeah, keep an eye out for those really granular prescriptive conversations we can have about, tips and tricks in the industry, because that's going to be coming out soon too.
Yeah, good. Alana, we had a question come in, which is probably more suited for us on the Domotz side, which was really around, are the integrations that we've done with ITGlue just related to the configurations? And the basic answer to that is, at this point, yes. Right. And again, I'm not going to claim to be an expert into how ITGlue does configurations in those systems, but our team really looked at one of the most common usage, or how service providers are utilizing ITGlue, which was really around the configurations process. And that's what we based a lot of our associations with our devices and the ITGlue assets. So that's where we are right now. We're always open to suggestions on what we can do differently, what we can do better, even what new integrations we can do. So if you have ideas or thoughts, at least from a Domotz side, I highly recommend you email our support team, which is support@domotz.com.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely this is something I spend a lot of my time on, is the kind of version 2, version 3, version X, like all those next iterations of all of our integrations are highly dependent on what we hear and what we decide we can go forward with. So always let us know what you think would be the best kind of next version of anything that you like in your tool stack, because that really helps us action what we can build next. So yeah.
I love Jay's comment here. First of all, he's got the initials JB, so I gotta like the guy already. But he says it's your opportunity to convince us to switch from a competitor. Why would you say that we should do that, right? He specifically pointed out Avik, right? Look, Aavik is a network monitoring tool, right? And they do a really good job. I don't fault them for being Canadian. Canadians are great. The thing I will say is that Domotz, for the value that we provide, for the data aggregation that we do, for our price points that we have, right? We think that Domotz provides a very, very compelling value proposition. The way in which you can scale and the way in which we have done the integration into ITGlue into particular, I think you'll see is pretty stellar, okay? If I had to give you exact reasons, right? Take a look at our value proposition, take a look at our support team, take a look at the things that we at Domotz have done and how we've continued to scale, right? That's going to be the way in which we do this. Good. Well, I think we're at our time here, Alana.
Yeah, I think so. That was really great. Thank you for all the questions and engagement. This is really fun for us, and we've got great ideas of what to do next. And it was great talking to you, JB, and having this conversation.
Thank you for this opportunity. It was great. I really appreciate you guys hosting this, and I really appreciate you guys bringing Domotz into this. So thank you again so much. And we look forward to working together with you guys and building out more and more integrations. So everybody have a great day, stay safe, and hopefully you can enjoy your winter or summer, depending on where you are right now.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everybody.